Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters, and welcome to our raw reaction review for Traumatica. Mikey's night terrors become reality when his mother begins showing signs of demonic possession. What he's about to experience will haunt him for the rest of his life and claim countless lives across generations. Well, Luke, Traumatica is one of these little surprise movies. I knew nothing about this. I don't know if you did. Before we got the information for the screener, and I knew there was like a trailer that had dropped. But hey, sometimes movies like this, when they do surprise us, tend to be some of our favorites. I can think of movies in this vein like The Dark and the Wicked was one that was recommended that I'd say is very similar to this. I would say When Evil Lurks, it kind of has those vibes, those feels, especially from the trailer and the poster. So I'm not going to lie, walking into Traumatica, I was kind of optimistic that we were going to have something really special walking away from this.
As we've been doing this for a couple of years, and it seems like around this time, as we start gearing up for the month of October and we get into the real Halloween vibes, I guess I'd say, we've had this kind of interesting streak of we usually find a hidden gem throughout, like right as we're gearing up. When Evil Lurks fell into that, and I think maybe I'm riding that high. I don't know, but I thought maybe Traumatica would be there as well. Then didn't check out the trailer. I did see the poster. I think Bloody Disgusting had dropped a article with the poster a couple days ago, because I remember seeing that when we were going to be doing Sunday Scaries. But other than that, I really didn't have an expectation other than I was hoping this was going to be a hidden gem that we were going to be talking about at the end of 2025.
Yes, and sitting down to watch this one, I have to admit, we did do our little BSG Beyond the Splatter Graves with some of our friends. I did this past week, and one of our buddies, Alex, had already seen it, and he made a one little comment that got me slightly concerned because he said, "Hey, it's really great, but then something weird happens." And you know what? That's unfortunately my experience with this movie. Is I enjoyed a lot of aspects, I would say, of the first half. I liked where it was going. But then you quickly realize that we're almost resetting the table. And unfortunately, I just don't think the demon, the story, the characters, any of this was established strong enough to really win me over in that aspect. It almost feels like they had two ideas for two movies with the same demon, with the same, incidents family, and they had to smash those scripts together. And it kind of makes for a bit of an unbalanced ride.
It feels like, in a way, they shed the spotlight on two different subgenres, in a sense, I
Mm-hmm.
think, as we get farther into the film. The first half, it's even probably a little over the first half of the film, we're really dealing with that more heavy supernatural aspect of it. And that portion I enjoyed. It had some decent tension. There are a couple of good scares in there as well. And I found myself enjoying that ride. But as we get deeper into the film, they change kind of the subgenres a little bit. And while the demon aspect is still prevalent, they kind of go in a different route. I don't really want to talk about it too much to spoil what they do in that portion of the film, but I felt myself rather disconnected with it. And when we look at the potential of that particular subgenre, you want an interesting creative route. You want that stamp on it to say, ooh, they did something different here. I like that aspect of it, and I like this aspect of it. But like you said, it just felt maybe they lost some of the personality. It felt rather clunky as well in terms of that transition, where you can distinctly say, this is the moment that this feels like a different film entirely.
Yeah, and that's never really a good sign when you're sitting down and watching something. You don't want to have that feeling. And some movies I've had that and they've been able to recover. I just don't think again that the subject matter, the things we're dealing with, the actual, entities and everything are nearly strong enough of a vessel to attach to. It almost feels like as we're getting things going and we're starting to really, like I said, piece together what's happening, we start to reset again, and it's like it's almost to a frustrating amount. And this isn't a very long movie. It's not like you're spending a whole ton of time, so it's almost confusing to me why we made that choice. I will say, for a film with the title Traumatica, I was expecting a lot of gore and hardcore, kind of like really disturbing moments. And I'll say there's some pretty good practical effects. There's some pretty good gore, there's some pretty good moments, but I don't think it's anything that's going to necessarily make your jaw hit the floor if you're kind of seeking this kind of stuff out.
Yeah, when especially with the amount of gore-filled things that we watch with the disturbing nature to it, you kind of have a bit of a high bar in order to, please us in a sense. But even that, I don't think this was even in the conversation of it. There are some good practical effects, like you said. There's one gory scene that really did catch my eye, but it's just a very brief scene. They don't really linger on anything. You're not going to walk away from this saying this was a blood fest that I really enjoyed. That's not that type of film. They really do focus down on this, I guess, from a disturbing standpoint. There's this familial element between two people that I found rather, disturbing to an extent. And from that portion, I think, could be triggering a little bit for some people. But
Oh yeah, there's some tough subject matter beyond just blood and gore in this for sure.
yes, so just definitely be aware of that. But other than that, when we get into the supernatural elements, like I said, there's a couple of good tension filled scenes, like in the darkness, things like that. But other than that, there isn't a handful of things that you're going to walk away from here saying, "Oh, that was well crafted," or "That's a memorable scene." It kind of just gets dumped into this melting pot till you get to that second half of the film where it just feels like an oddball connector piece that, like you said, feels like a different script entirely, other than we're still trying to connect this demon in there, which when we look at those demon aspects, you really want an expansive lore. I always go back to something like Sinister, where we have those video calls and we're understanding things about the demon and how everything works. And you get that great unveiling moment of what the story's going to be ultimately as we work toward the end. You don't really get that here. I think they tried to plant some seeds, but especially with that change toward the end of the film, you don't really get that, oh my gosh moment, and you really feel on board with it. It just feels like this film is missing a lot of different pieces of the puzzle to really feel like you're along the ride with Traumatica.
I was gonna say, I think this is one of the few movies that I would actually, because I've been saying a lot recently, we could take away time. I actually wouldn't have minded maybe another 15 minutes if it was really gonna give us more time to dive into, again, like you said, the lore of this, so we could get a really strong grasp of the stakes. Like you get the basic stakes of it. It's like you have the understanding that one character, our main character we're following, Mikey, has to basically do something to save somebody, and it's like it's just that though. And when you have things, again, like unfortunately when walking into this expecting when evil lurks and Terrified and all these other wonderful films that have just blown my mind with this kind of stuff, this kind of harsher look at possession horror, I just felt like they almost cut themselves off at the just below the knees. They weren't fully standing, and it's unfortunate that that's the one little piece that I think would have really tied this thing together for me.
And when we get into these smaller films like this, I get excited about like the creative license behind it in terms of
Mhm.
what you can really do. And we saw the newest Conjuring film, and spoilers, we weren't huge fans of it, but that happens a lot with a lot of the bigger budgeted supernatural films, where when you're in that general audience, you're just kind of trying to do your basic scares and kind of get just a general lore out there. But when we get into the deeper, smaller budgeted, we're dealing with demons, the supernatural forces, I get excited of what kind of potential we're going to get. The storytelling, the uniqueness, and Traumatica unfortunately did not pack that punch that I was looking for. We get the exposition of exactly some of the backstory of this one object and what's going on, but that's maybe a 2-3 minute scene of dialogue, and that's really the basis of it. And then we kind of are just along with some of the scares that, again, some hit and a lot of them don't. So I felt myself having trouble staying engaged with this film. From a character standpoint, we're dealing with some trauma. There's at the very beginning there, I think there's a text that kind of deals with a couple different child traumas that people can go through, and I think they try to apply that through the
Mhm.
the actual film itself. But some of it just doesn't work for me. It didn't feel overly engaged. I saw what they were doing. I just wished that we did get more time, because especially when you do that subgenre change, I think, this isn't a Ryan Coogler Sinners film where we're pushing over 2 hours and are trying to do a bunch of different things that mix and somehow gel well together. This feels like we switch We try to sprinkle in a couple different lores, and then we're out. And it's like, I just wanted some more time here because this isn't an overly slow moving film, I don't think.
No,
I
not
think,
at all.
you could have really milked some extra time here and put in some extra layers of storytelling. And maybe we'd be sitting here saying this was rather engaging and we did feel completely satisfied by the end of the film.
Yeah, and I think like overall, it's one of those things where I'm not even like saying that the filmmakers and the people involved necessarily did a bad job from anything that they were trying to accomplish. I again, I think it's a high compliment that we're sitting here saying we wish we had a little bit more to it, but it's unfortunate that it just seems like I said, they just cut off a little too much, or they just didn't dive deep enough to where I feel like I can really attach myself and be like, oh, I'm really interested in this. I really want to see this go. And it's like they had that potential. Like all the pieces are here. I just wish that we could have maybe assembled them a different way, kind of brought something more to them. And I think that, like you said, we would have had something that I would find myself being very pleased with. But again, I don't think people are going to necessarily hate this if you're looking for something that's not quite When Evil Lurks terrified, levels of gore, levels of horror, but maybe a little something that's a bit harsher than, like you said, a Conjuring or Insidious kind of stuff. It's almost like a medium place there. So with that, I think I'm going to have to go with proceed with caution on this, just because, again, I just don't necessarily know the audience. It's not going to satisfy hardcore fans, and it's not really going to, I think, gel with a basic audience because like they're more used to having things necessarily given to them like a Conjuring audience. And again, they try to walk that line a little bit too precisely in this.
Yeah, it did feel like a little bit of pushing and pulling where we didn't know what direction to take the story because it seems like, they hint toward what we would be looking for with smaller films and those supernatural elements and some deep rooted lore. But then it feels like they pull themselves back from it and never get, into that fifth gear to say, man, this is what this film's about. And we have this very particular creative stamp on it. Just, it holds itself back from getting there. And I think, a couple added scenes, maybe a little bit more gore, some interesting backstory to the demon, and just some more, a handful more of terrifying scenes. I think you could have had something really special here. But I am excited to see what they're going to do next. I think Traumatica is not a horrible film by any sense. It is something that it's really hard to put your finger on and how a lot of horror fans are going to feel about this, because I think you're going to be left wanting more and say, that story did offer me something fun, but I wish they would have went in this route with it or presented this as well. I'm going to give this one a proceed with caution as well. I think there's something here. I don't know if I see myself ever going back and watching this one, at least sitting down and giving it the full runtime, maybe putting it on just to see if maybe a couple other scenes do hit with me. But I think, there was a vision here, just wasn't pulled off 100%. So if this one by the trailer hits with you, I think it might be worth some of your time, but don't go in overly expecting something that they're going to deliver.
Yeah, and to be fair, that could have been, again, I'll admit for myself, that could have been my expectations. Just seeing, again, the way the film was marketed, the way that the like just from
great,
the poster, yeah, it's like they really were hitting on that. They were doing the whole thing, because after the fact, I've seen now little buzz bits where they're showing people in the theater with the night vision, and they're doing the jump scare. And it's like, that's what we're doing with this one. We're gonna hype it up that much, because I really don't think people are gonna find a ton of this stuff all that shocking. So it's like, I don't know. Maybe we're jaded. Maybe we've seen too many movies. Who knows? But let us know down below what you guys thought of Traumatica, if you got a chance to check it out. We just also had a review for The Jester go up maybe a day or two ago. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. That's an interesting one as well. It's coming out soon. And yeah, lots of other fun stuff on the way. So until next time, guys, I'm Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And remember, stay scared.
Do the hard shit, gonna do it live. Cause Splattercast kick it every day they live. Splattercast, gonna slash your ass. 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 Splattercast, gonna slash your ass.